Hi there, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Reimagining the Future. What does an equitable and intersectional anti-racist world look like? My name is Carrie Maultsby-Lute. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Action at Mills College. I'm excited to be your moderator for today's experience as we see a range of visions for a future that works for all. As humans in the United States, we have dealt with unprecedented and trauma over the last year, and it continues. COVID-19 has upended our sense of normalcy, and on top of loss of life, there are widening inequalities. The racial justice movement, inspired by the murders of numerous Black people by the police, including George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, has been a continued source of trauma for Black people and an awakening for many people who are blind to these realities. How do we as a people move forward, you might wonder? One of my favorite quotes by Malcolm Gladwell states, "The visionary starts with a clean sheet and reimagines the world." As children, we start off believing that anything is possible. My 3-year-old believes he is equally part Spider-Man and the Hulk. It's probably for the best that he grows out of his Marvel character belief, but unfortunately, as we humans shed our sense of magic, we can lose our vision of the future, where we aspire to greatness outside of the confines or perceptions of reality. This brings me to Afrofuturism, the envisioning of a future void of white supremacist thought and the structures that oppress Black communities. Inspired by Afrofuturism and a conversation with a colleague, Ife Walker, the need for a mental model and cultural blueprint to guide society came to light and born the question, what does an anti-racist and intersectional world really look like? We are here today to learn from leading experts in their field as they share with us their vision that stemmed from this creative exercise and from their life's work. These presentations will be brief, and they are intended to paint a picture of an ideal future that can serve as a cultural blueprint to guide our society forward. Future conversations, including our annual conference, are intended to further unpack solutions and strategies. Unfortunately, we will not be able to cover every area today, and important topics around the arts, the growing call for alternatives to capitalism, and technology and AI will have to be explored in future conversations. Invariably, there will be critique of what we see today, and our goal is to widen our aperture for varied perspectives and creative ideas. A huge part of clarity entails working definitions. When we talk about anti-racism, I refer to Ibram Kendi's notion that, quote unquote, to be anti-racist is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups. To be anti-racist is to deracialize behavior. Behavior is something humans do, not races do. The National League of Cities states that anti-racism is also a system in which we create policies, practices, and procedures to promote racial equity. Anti-racism forces us to analyze the roles that institutions and systems play in the racial inequities that we see. A key goal of anti-racism work is to uplift the innate humanity and individuality of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The definition of equity that we are using is developed by Policy Link, states an equitable society is one in which we can all participate and prosper. The goals of equity must be to create conditions that allow all to reach their full potential. With these definitions in mind, you will see the creative outcomes by leaders in their fields as they envision what an intersectional and anti-racist future could look like. My son may not grow up to be Spider-Man, but he should continue to aspire to dream big like May Among the Stars, which is his favorite book about the first Black woman to travel in space, Mae Jemison. There is so much to learn from the magic of children. We start off as dreamers and must continue to vision and actualize the world we want to see. The format for today's experience, Pecha Kucha, was created in Japan and means chit chat. Each presentation will be exactly 6 minutes and 40 seconds, consisting of 20 slides. There will be a 5-minute Q&A following each speaker. These questions will be procured from the audience, from you. There might be a slight delay in between speakers, so please engage with chat and your fellow community during transitions and throughout the presentation. There's also a People tab in your side navigation bar where you can direct message or video connect with an attendee, find your friends or make new ones. Also, don't forget to tweet and share your thoughts on social media. This session will also be recorded. In closing, please don't be shy, ask questions for our speakers, and equally important, note ways that the speaker's vision can be expanded and ideas that you actually have for building on what you have heard. Thanks again for joining us, and we will kick it off with Kusum Crimmel as she talks about a post-white supremacist equitable world.
Is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. We are the builders of our own evolution with our imagination, such as Carrie already shared. And so how do we do this? We do this through our minds. Everything is created twice, first in the mind and then in substance. We are the builders of the future with our words, our beliefs, our prayers, and our visions, creating 5 minutes from now, creating a year from now, creating 10 years from now. So I'm inviting you to be with me in this time. And I bring up fractals because fractals is how we see the whole, which is made up of smaller identical parts. So the smaller parts mirror to create the larger parts. And fractals happen in nature, and we are nature. And so looking at this offers an example of how we really look at a problem as large as white supremacy, because what starts in the intimate duplicates and creates the macro. So whatever we want to see in the macro in our larger society, we really have to start working from the micro, from the inside, to create the outer world. So today, what does freedom look like? What does freedom from white supremacy feel like? It may seem like a difficult thing to imagine, but it only becomes what we think it will through our imagination, our visioning, and our co-creating that future. So today I'm giving an offering of my imagination into that future. And in my imagination, there's a National Reparations Council led by Ta-Nehisi Coates and Sonia Renee Taylor. They are bringing forth reparations in this country, state by state, city by city, and creating a national truth and reconciliation program that goes through and is paid for at the same time as the military is being defunded, because the values of truth are overcome with the commitment to reconciliation. And in this process, I see and know white-bodied people taking the charge, doing the work to change and focus in and face into the necessary work of transmuting internalized white supremacy, of transmuting and recognizing the histories and past experiences that we have. And so, of course, this turns into an unprecedented amount of apologies, both public and private, as the United States of amnesia begins to crumble in the face of truth and reconciliation becomes a reality. But of course, an apology is only the beginning, because after an apology, we have to create change. And so on my vision forward, Native peoples all over this country are given lands back, and their wisdom and values are honored by becoming in charge of the National Park Services and the other natural resources in this land. So in this picture, I see Native American people in this land, Ohlone people, recognizing their contribution to this world, to the natural resources, and really learning from their values and their way of holding and rematriating the land. In my imagination, I always see national monuments such as this one that honors the lives of those lost to lynchings, that they become all over this nation so that we have a commitment to telling the truth, so that this collectively calms our nervous system, so we recognize the truth. And of course, as we unfold into truth and reconciliation, defunding the police becomes a natural experience. Because when the truth comes out, it becomes impossible to justify the police system that we have once known it. And of course, this shifts and transforms. And in the transition from the policing that that we once knew, community responders, networks of locally respected and skilled people form crisis response teams. Are large when there's a big harm that has happened. And sometimes they're small, showing up with 5 or 6 people at a crisis situation going on in the community. And so as prisons are closing, restorative justice circles become ingrained in how we relate to each other, how we navigate conflict and harm. So whether that's happening in the schools, in our work environments, or even when we're in a camping trip and we have to come together and talk about what has happened. And so, of course, as I mentioned, the schools are shifting, changing, that there's culturally relevant teaching, curriculum development has spread across the country in organizations such as the Black Teacher Project. Teachers are paid a high salary. There's been a complete overhaul of outdated curriculum, and there's high incentives for teachers from local communities to work in schools because representation matters. Our young people are learning about the diverse and complex histories they see themselves in, their cultures are represented, and this is building a strong sense of confidence and sense of self in our younger generation. And these are the beginnings of those fractals that are building up, and they're creating our media of today. So similar to this show, Kim's Convenience, every single person to the left has their own movie or show representing the complex truths of who they are. I see our media transforming and changing to be a representation of the true diversity of this land. And yes, as we change and shift to decreasing white supremacy, taking it all away, there are times when people come together of multiple races, multiple cultures, in joy, in love, and connection. And I also want to acknowledge that still, even in this time, people often still want to be around people who are similar to them. And that I see in this future that every single one of these groupings of people still is alive, vibrant, joyful in the absence of racism. Because beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation. By each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. And so as in fractals, we cannot become what we want by remaining what we are. We have to transform within so that our larger society transforms. So thank you very much. And I think Carrie might be jumping on, but that's the yes, collectivity calming our nervous system. Hey, Carrie.
Hi there. Thank you, Kusum. That was powerful. So much. Way to open up. Thank you so much. I did want to open this time up for the audience. It's your time to ask Kusum, expand on what she has said, ask her questions. So please put something in chat. And while you all are developing some questions for Kusum, I will kick it off with one that I have that I'll be asking of all speakers. So Kusum, when we talk about community empowerment and this post-white supremacist world that we're aspiring to live in, what are some of the things that we can all do as individuals to actualize this vision that you've put forward for the future?
I think one of the skills that we have to get good at is accountability. I think a skill and accountability, and this comes for all of us, though of course people with more levels of social privilege have more accountability that needs to be held. But I think in general, we are a culture that wants to ignore things that happen and want to put them under the rug and act like it didn't happen. When there's a conflict, we go off and just tell all the people about it and why they were wrong, we were wronged, instead of actually facing in and saying, wow, I don't know what happened, but I'm willing to step into this place and say, what can I do to make it better? It's building a muscle in ourselves to say, I'm willing to sit in this really hard conversation. Resma Menakem talks about it in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, facing into clean pain. Mm-hmm. In between clean pain and dirty pain. And clean pain is the pain that, yeah, it's hard, it's challenging, it might be painful in the moment, but afterwards there's a freedom. Whereas dirty pain is not having those conversations, maybe pushing off your pain later, but it shows up in your in your nervous system that never really settles because you're living in a state of shame and blame. Yeah, so that's one thing. I mean, there's tons of things, but that's the first thing that comes up.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm just reviewing the chat and trying to source other things. Emergent strategy and pleasure activism. Maybe you could expand there. I know a lot of folks gave shout outs to Adrienne Marie Brown. So perhaps you can talk more about that.
Yeah, Adrienne is definitely one of my my mentors. We know each other through somatics, so I've done a little bit of work, but other than that, I just am a follower and a believer. I have all of her, so many of the values that come out of emergent strategy on my wall that I run my thoughts through, but fractals really was the thing that I knew about fractals before, but really learning it through emergent strategy was so helpful, of this idea that everything is recreating itself in the same way. And so when I think about it, and I think about even restorative justice, oftentimes in our media now, it's like, oh, we need restorative justice, we need restorative justice. But then the same people were saying that we need it, we don't know how to do it in our own lives. And so if we can't create it in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods, in our own towns, how can we ask for a much larger government change or societal change in it? So I think like everything in the minute is the same as the macro. And yeah, nature as emergent strategies, nature is the guide. Yes.
Wonderful. And so we have time, I know we kind of are running a little bit behind, so we don't have as much time for the Q&A, but we will take one more question that I see that came in from Murali. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Kusum, what you are saying is very much along the lines of outward mindset that the Arbinger Institute evangelizes. Have you heard about Arbinger? So
I have not. I would love to read up. Maybe if there's specifics about it, it would be helpful to be able to, if there's a question to answer. But I'm excited to learn more.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I will want to say, because a couple people said something in the United States of amnesia. And I do really believe that is the value system that this country has led from, of this idea that we can just live in a place of, it's like, I call it convenient amnesia, that a lot of people live from this, I don't remember that. But definitely remember 9/11, right? There's these like moments where we have to remember always. We should always remember 9/11, but we'll just conveniently forget hundreds of years of slavery and conveniently forget the colonization and the takeover. So it's just, this country, it's like we have to break open that piece in order to get to this next place that we're visioning into.
So good afternoon. My name is Wendi Williams. I'm the Dean of the School of Education here at Mills College. And the presentation I put together is Reimagining Education in an Equitable Anti-Racist World, or Hello Future. Okay. And like all big existential and spiritual questions that grapple with intersectional and anti-racism, in 2020, I looked to Afrofuturism and the HBO sci-fi series Lovecraft Country for meaning. Itasha L. Womack defined Afrofuturism as an intersection of imagination, technology, the future, and liberation. And I cannot think of a better way to position the reimagining of education that holds promise for all of our youth. Enter Hippolyta, or How Black Female Positionality Reveals Structural Level Need. During opening remarks for the School of Education's Black Lives Matter at Work at Week of Action, Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action last year, I quoted an often quoted statement by James Baldwin, thinking about why our current systems need Black girls. Baldwin posed the question in regard to the N-word during a interview in the 60s, 70s, and asked that white people, this country, in the US, asked themselves why they needed the Negro to be in that particular role. And I come back to Hippolyta. In Lovecraft Country, her roles serve others, and primarily her family, her community, her husband, and her daughter. And yet she desires, like her husband, to travel and engage adventure and be also considered a loving and dedicated parent in that world. However, the world that they're structured into doesn't permit that for her. And so though she still wants those things, she puts those on the back burner, and only later in that series and in their relationship do they have an opportunity to explore the ways in which he abused the power and privilege allotted him to get the little bit of freedom that would be available to both of them for himself, acknowledging the patriarchal betrayal that is associated with that. And Hippolyta realizes that she needs to figure out who she is in that context and beyond that. In Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Neale Hurston famously wrote a very prolific truism. She says, "So the white man throw down the load and tell the nigger man to pick it up. He picks it up because he has to, but he does not tote it. Instead, he hands it to his womanfolk, the nigger woman. And as far as then that she is the mule of the world as far as she can see." Very, very critical to understand that this society is built on the idea of other people carrying the load. And one of the things that I want us to think about are who are our educational mules and what systems and processes, approaches, and require them to be in that position. I Am, another character in Lovecraft, poses a question back to Hippolyta that only she can answer, which is, who are you? Who do you want to be? And once she does answer that from her own imaginary, can she access worlds that were previously unavailable? And so my question is, what are those that we need to ask ourselves in education? Those would be, what can liberatory teaching and learning look like for all of our children? What are the material psychic conditions necessary for all children to learn well? And what are the material psychic conditions necessary for teachers to teach toward an equitable, intersectional, anti-racist world? We also have to think about the practices, policies, and resources that would make that possible. We often place children, families, and communities in the position to make choices within circumstances that really offer no good option. In the 40s, New York psychologist Kenneth and Mamie Clark conducted the infamous doll test to show the negative impact of racism on Black children's self-esteem, as evidenced when they chose the white doll over the Black doll when determining which one was most nice or most kind. From those studies, we determined that these poor children were making a bad or sad choice because they did not love themselves, when really they were merely mirroring the societal lack of love or regard for their personhood, their Black personhood. They argued, and it went to the Supreme Court in Brown v. Board of Education, that Black and brown girls, Black boys and girls would do better to be around in integrated settings. Today is not much different. We use words like intersectionality, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and at the same time, Black, brown, Indigenous, poor, and disabled students are disproportionately pushed out of their classrooms, their schools, their communities. So we must ask ourselves, what are the changes we need to make in our society for this child to begin to choose herself? Liberation, elevation, education. Janelle Monáe asserts in her new song, Turntable, that she's going to kick down the door, the old regime, liberation, education, elevation, that America is a lie, but the whole world is about to testify. In an NPR music review of Janelle Monáe's Turntable video, Fitzgerald concludes that by the end of the song, the use of the pronoun I becomes we, acknowledging a full-fledged surrendering to a collective need to effect real change. And so we must ask, what are full-fledged surrendering to create education for an equitable, anti-racist world? That would include cultivating a culture of thrivance. In addition, it requires that we think about what it means to raise resistors, educators seeing themselves as partners with families, and understanding the role of race and racism, and learning good, solid knowledge and based information that young people can use then to navigate and negotiate their lives and realities. We also must trust young people to be introduced to, explore, and navigate the world with a critical lens early. That means providing them opportunities to impact their behaviors and assumptions, as well as to give them grace and opportunities to engage in reasonable accountability that is developmentally appropriate. And finally, we can draw in from the perspectives of leading thinkers and knowledge makers relative to ways forward. Monique Morris's second book, Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, specifically speaks to practices that can engage in the saving of Black girls as opposed to the push out. And so focusing on the practices that work are the way forward. And so as we wonder what an equitable and intersectional anti-racist world can look like, what our future in education can look like, it needs to begin with the education of our youth that is critical, and that holds the potentials for realizing that future. If we want them to care and honor the humanity of others, we need to care for them and honor their humanity. And if we want to create educational spaces that create deep and embodied educational opportunities for them, we must do that for their teachers, who also need those spaces for their own thrivance. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Williams. That was amazing. You covered so much in such a short time. And the chat has been on fire with references to love, craft, country. And so while people are thinking about some questions, audience, what would you like to ask Dr. Williams right now? I'll kick it off with a question similar to what I asked Kusum. When we're thinking about, again, community empowerment, what are some of the things that we can do as individuals to help actualize the vision that you just painted for our future?
Well, coming from the field of education and the perspective of my field and our schools and our colleges, to really appreciate the one down perspective or humility that we need to take in engaging communities and young people about what it means for them to be a learner, as well as what it means for them to be a teacher and an expert on that experience. I'm a dean of a school of education, and I'm very mindful that the expertise, the instruction, the preparation actually comes from the young people in the community. And that as we begin to think about reshaping and reshifting power dynamics around who is the holder of knowledge, that embedded in there is the space in which we not only prop up, but elevate really that voice and that perspective, and learn from the young people the work and the ways in which we need to be working with them to facilitate their learning, but also their ability to potentiate their future. We don't know that. They know that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So we are getting some questions in. This is wonderful. Thank you, folks. How do we create a decolonized curriculum and educational culture starting from pre-K to higher ed?
You know, I think Kusum started with really speaking to and unpacking those notions of white supremacist organizational culture, and to understand that schools and schools of education and our educational systems it is the incubator for that white supremacist organizational culture that we get every human being in this country ready for, in order to even know how to access opportunity or success, which are embedded in that culture. So it really is a more deep unpacking and I would say dismantling. I want to be honest that I don't necessarily think that we've all bought into the necessity of doing so. We still engage and play in the games and the power plays that perpetuate those systems. In many ways, it will be difficult for us to do so, because we've gotten so much value from engaging in the work and in our practices that way. Teachers, professors, we like to be smart, and we have to imagine what a world looks like if we enter a space, a learning space, and career community. From the place of we all contribute and have emergent curriculum that comes with, from our young people, from the communities from which they're coming from, and from ourselves together, what that looks like. What if we were all the fractals in terms of that curriculum? And I think that that's where a decolonized curriculum can drive from.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think we have time for definitely one more question. Dean Kate asks, COVID is widening the equity gap in education to unprecedented levels. What can people outside of education, the education field, do to help this?
I think it's a wonderful question. And it's interesting. Education, like COVID, is one of those fields that will definitely touch all of us. We all go through school. And for those of us who are even professionals and working, as you talked about your 3-year-old with his Spider-Man fancy, I think it's really cute. We all are touched by schools because we have children, our own family members, our community members embedded there. I think what we need to do is treat the school like the community-based anchor that it is, and find ourselves in there no matter what our role is. Each community member has a buy-in and a connection to that school. We have We're real stakeholders, no matter what our perspectives are. When we take a stance that is that this school is of and for our community, and therefore we have accountabilities to it and it has accountabilities to us, then what we do around fundraising looks different. What we do around understanding what our teachers need and our staffers need and our leadership needs in schools becomes very different. What we do in the voting polls looks very different, because it's definitely a bit more intimate, rather than, oh, I have a child in that school and so I'm engaged there. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but as a community member, that school is a hub, is an incredible and necessary anchor for cultivating the next generation. And so then we should all be embedded and active there.
Hi, my name is Dr. Catrina Jaime. I'm the head of the Public Health and Health Equity Program. As I was saying, the equitable future in public health starts with us coming together as a community. My community started in the Philippines with my Lola, my grandmother. This is a family photo of her 7 children in school uniforms, and she was married at 16 with a high school diploma. She wanted more for her children and to be able to go to university. This is my mother. She too believed that an education was the best way for my brothers and I to get a brighter future. With support of family in the States and an amnesty from the US government, we immigrated to California. I grew up with strong peer supports because I had my 2 older brothers. When we visited the Philippine consulate, and when I finally got my green card, I became an alien resident. Despite these stigmas, we were fortunate to have supportive communities who accepted us. When I got my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh, I became part of the 1% of people who reached this level of education. And this was possible because of generational support, because of my husband and the family support that I've had, and because of my son who inspires me. And all of this is not done alone. It's done and it has changed the trajectory of my life and my well-being. And this is why I'm able to present to you here today. Education is just one of the social determinants of health. And these are health factors that are non-medical that impact our health and well-being. Health is not just about individual behavior. It's about what opportunities individuals have to choose from. And these opportunities look different based on where you live, the color of your skin, and the circumstances that you were born in. The County Health Rankings model helps us see this vision, where policies and programs either support or restrict social determinants of health and health factors. And these are health factors that are modifiable that impact our health outcomes. That includes how long we live and our quality of life. And one of the most impactful health outcomes that are impacting us today are social and economic factors. These social determinants of health that I'm talking about is economic and poverty. Here is a community this is a clip of health by Dr. Kamara Jones. And here we see the orange community having supports in place, where the green community may be living in poverty, don't have access to primary prevention from helping them fall off this cliff of health. They have no safety nets to help protect them, and they don't have any medical care that helps them stay safe. Equity is the solution. When we think of equality, giving each person the same box is not meeting them where they are. It's clearly not. Where equity is meeting people where they are and understanding their differences so they have the fairness to watch the same game. And more so, the liberty to remove this fence so that we don't need additional resources to be watching the same thing. Equity is done in 3 functions in public health. That includes assessment, really monitoring and investigating what are these health problems. And then the second is policy development. How do we educate and mobilize communities to actually solve these problems? And then more so, assurance. Are these solutions actually helping the communities that we care about? Here at Mills, in response to the first generation students and students of color, Dr. Apara and Dr. Young combined science and social justice into the public health and health equity program. And as the head of the program, I was able to develop internship-based course to help students actually be in partnership with and for communities. And I'll be highlighting these internships now. This is Meenakshi. She works at Monterey with Hamida, and together they help empower women to make decisions about their sexual and reproductive health. And Meenakshi reflects, I feel empowered knowing that I have helped improve the health of East Asian women in Oakland through a feminist and culturally relevant lens. This is a social media post with our student Nadia and her supervisor Sharice above. And through the DiTribe Foundation, they synthesize information about diabetes technology, policies and therapies, and distribute this information to over 10,000 professionals, industry leaders, and patients via social media. This is a partnership with our local children's school here. This is Supervisor Jenny with our student Akua in front. And together, Akua has said, this internship has helped me collaborate with the Alameda County public health officials to understand the impacts of COVID-19 policies and regulations, and the important role that local government and school administrations have to protect the health and well-being of families. This is Jennifer. Jennifer is working in partnership with Dr. Martinez at the Public Health Institute on her research study on alcohol causes breast cancer. Through this support, she's able to provide health campaigns that help women in California understand the impacts of alcohol consumption and the increased risk of breast cancer. This is a collaboration we have with UCSF and Dr. Baraka's research and health education team, who's currently implementing a youth empowerment sexual health program locally this January, virtually. And 2 of our middle students will be helping intern and assess that program at Castlemont High School in East Oakland. This is a student-led and student initiative from HAFA, who is the president of the Muslim Student Alliance. HAFA saw the importance of collaborating with Liberty North Korea, with Sarah and Professor Mickey featured in this picture, to bring awareness about the experiences of North Korean refugees, and it emphasizes the shared value of people over politics. This is Nadia, who also created an internship with Lincoln Family Services, specifically with Chris, featured here below, from the Mandela Family Resource Center in West Oakland. Together, we developed an internship where students can come support family navigators to help support families who have children between the ages of 0 to 5 years old. This is a screenshot of our recent added full spectrum doula training course. Through the initiative of Tess Waxman, she knew that there was a need to find something that was an affordable and accessible way to train to become a doula. And through the partnership with Cornerstone Doula Services, we were able to offer that. And Tess reflects that this was an important thing to have at Mills. This is a recent student-led event by Kayla, Lily, Esther, Mackenzie, and Jada. It's called Being STEM in Black, While Black. And it was important to reflect how health and inequities and exclusions in the classroom impact our Black students, and that recommendations were needed to understand how to do this better. Through my diverse experiences and the support of my communities from the Philippines to Mills College, I'm fortunate to work with students, community partners, and academics to work towards a more equitable public health together. This cannot be done alone. I encourage each of you to be involved in your communities and be the change that you want to see.
Thank you, Dr. Jaime. It's powerful, and I love seeing so many students that I even recognize a part of the movement. The audience, please come up with some questions for Dr. Jaime, and I will kick it off and end it on a great way, talking about how the community, should be engaged in this. And I'd love for you to elaborate more on what are some of the things that we can do as individuals, community members, to actualize and the vision that you've just painted.
I think it's being involved in what you're passionate about, right? So I didn't make this a health equity program. I did it together with the leaders before me, like Dr. Opara and Dr. Young, but really my students, right? Being close in proximity with our students. Our students are the ones who are living and breathing this every day in a different way. I'm living in a space where I'm fortunate and have been supported, and a lot of my students haven't. So being involved in the communities that they're in and allowing them to co-learn and co-create with you is really bringing a much deeper diversity than I could have ever imagined that connects me with community. And I think it's about getting closer to one another and having that proximity and not being scared to share our stories.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I'm still waiting for some questions to come in. So I'll ask one about, what was this process like for you? We haven't really talked much about the process, the creation process, and thinking about this really meaty question. So I'd love for you to maybe spend a few moments discussing how this felt for you to envision this future.
Sure. I think I really have the privilege to be part of it, right? To go back to those fractals, right? My small community, because all of us think in this grander federal scale, and it can seem so overwhelming to feel like all of this is on your shoulders. But what are we doing locally, right? How are we impacting what we are a part of, whether that's within our families, within our communities, within our job? Again, I'm super privileged to be in a space where I get to do this for work that I'm passionate about. I get to work with students every day and get close to understanding what are the discrepancies that they're facing. I currently have students who have family members who have passed away because of COVID-19. I have students who don't have access to internet because they're living in rural spaces. How do we understand that? We understand that because we listen and we hear their stories and we understand that they're going through so much. How can we support them? And whether that means extending an assignment that's due or making an accommodation with a person who's dealing with grief, we need to understand that. And the only way to do that is if we actually know each other. If we actually build our communities with one another and get to know each other in this proximity that we're so scared to get to know one another.
Excellent. People-centered institutions, that came up in the chat. You know, and how do you, when thinking about public health, let's connect that with COVID. What are you seeing in terms of increased issues and inequities? Maybe perhaps you could speak to that.
Sure. As
how
the
that's
social
showing up for you, or even in the classroom.
Well, in the social determinants of health, right, we know that there's gaps that exist. I didn't have an opportunity to go into it, but we know health inequities exist, and not just with race ethnicities, but where people live. So if you go look at the county health rankings, you can actually look up your own county. All of your counties are listed. There's 58 counties in California, and this is done nationwide. So I actually encourage all of you to look that up, and you can look up your own county and see where your health ranking is. And you can really start seeing how this discrepancy is not just within racial disparities, but also geographical disparities. What's going on with our rural communities? What's going on with women? What's going on with children? And so it's really important to see that how COVID is actually revealing the inequities that have already existed, and it's exacerbated it, right? So we know that those who have more privilege and more advantages are still doing okay, but we're not talking about the people who are not. COVID is not just about stopping the spread of an infectious disease, it's about people's incomes and livelihoods. What's the mental health aspect of COVID? You know, we focus so much on getting this vaccine and investing all this money, but yet we're not focusing on prevention. Why aren't we stopping this infection to begin with? Why aren't we encouraging supports for food insecurity and economic support? But instead, we're putting all of our resources, like I said, to that medical aspect, when there's so much more we can do on the ground to help so many more.
So my presentation really talks about me and my journey as a result of being a rather impatient human being. My background is actually designing very expensive, high-performance, sustainable buildings for NASA and very high-level clients. And while working on it, I realized that what I was doing was not benefiting a wider audience. And what would I need to do in order to benefit the communities that I really am concerned about? And so this quote from Marsha Fudge really talks about the journey that's as a Black designer, you're often faced with trying to fit yourself in. And as a result of starting my own practice and opening the office again in 2014, I realized that part of being a Black designer meant I also had to deal with policy and power because they affect the work that I do. And the presentation will start to talk about the real work of architects and architecture, which is what we build really truly reflects our social values. And if we can start to ground truth some of these policies, we'll be able to get to the point of the future that we really, really want to see. So the project I'm going to talk about really has to do with the impact of housing or lack of housing thereof, and how that impacts the African-American community, which we see every day from the large amount of humanity we see living on our streets. But also, as an architect who used to be an economist, I tend to look a lot at the very grounding data. 58% of our households spend more than 30% on rent. The fact that we have the average age of the homeless population being 50 and above tells us the narrative is wrong. People on our streets are not young and strong. People on the streets are getting older and older. And we are not planning for a full life cycle for a human being. We're not designing for it. And that is very disturbing to me, that we have a culture that really focuses on just the young and forgets that you go through an entire life cycle, and your body and needs really change over time as a result of those changes that where you are in your life. The fact that we have a society that I think mentioned earlier, convenient amnesia. It's as if we always look towards the young. But I was fortunate enough to meet a homeowner, fifth generation African-American, who made me and reminded me that there's another narrative that's out there, that Black families have always been on the margin, but they've always created their own pathway because they were forced to. And part of that, as a Black architect, I also work in the margins. I really look at the things that are informal, ignored. And one of the narratives that's out there is that, you know, the slum urbanism that we see, but I actually see something else, that we have a lot of space in our backyards, and this provides an opportunity to provide housing. Because I'm also very strategic in my impatience, Annette's request to build an in-law unit started a 3-year journey on a national initiative to get ADUs, accessory dwelling units, built at a national scale in order to conserve African-American communities and also cultural conservation using an ecological framework. And so from this detailed list of my methodology about how I look at policy, how I look at the actual geometry of land, has helped me to write national policy supporting in-law units and access to in-law units across the nation. But one aspect that you all may not realize, we talk about redlining and how white families have been were able to accumulate wealth. What we don't talk about is how the nonprofit industrial complex also supports that wealth cycle. And one way we can break that is actually shifting what we spend on affordable housing units, which is about $600,000 per apartment to construct, where we could spend $150,000 instead on an in-law unit that a homeowner would own. One pathway is about investing in the home and the family. The other pathway is investing in a factory. And so you can tell that in my studio, we work a lot with numbers. We understand that we have 65,000 single family homes in Oakland. And if we only took 5% of that, we could build 3,265 in-law units. It's also remarkable that the cost of those units is $490 million. Well, actually in 2016, California authorized Alameda County to spend $580 million on affordable housing. So we could have taken care of 3,000 people already. But I also recognize that what I'm proposing really starts to take a hold of working as a community, that we shouldn't be thinking of factories building our homes, but rather can we harness our local communities to build together? One of the things that concerns me is that we are splintered as a society. And I am actually interested in reknitting through a cooperative measure of designing and building our in-law units together, because that's how I think we're going to heal the society and reduce the fence lines that currently exist in our minds, but also how we're socializing. So this is an example of one of the units how I approach the in-law unit design, where I'm looking at not just the efficiency of the unit, because I tap into my sustainable design background, but I'm also looking at what are those monthly expenses. So on this 3-year journey, I was invited to work with a rural community. And one of the things that came away from working with them on in-law units is how, as a society, it's the cultural and collective values that will lead us our way forward, that it will not be a top-down, it will be a ground-up process. Now, the other part of Marsha Fudge's statement was that she was sick and tired of seeing a Black person tired of the HUD department, but I have to disagree with her. I need a Black person to be in charge of HUD, because that's who provides the federal loans to build housing. And part of that is because I think we need to understand the wealth and value that we inherently own as Black families, but we don't understand the true value of it. And so what I am seeing is that the value difference between a white family and a Black family is a Black family is only able to build 1/3 the size of what a white family can build in terms of an in-law unit. And that's purely because of racism in the financial market. And so this presentation is really not just about design, but understanding that there's an environment that affects what we build. And if you're unaware of the nuances that support the housing market, we will never address this issue around wealth discrepancy. And so we have to we talk about fractals, but we actually have to understand what is the DNA of each and every single particle that supports the construction of a house, and each and every single particle that supports a community. And part of that understanding, it is a very fragile knitting of very informal, but sometimes very formal structures that we have to start talking about. We have to start dismantling those very structures that prevent us from building the housing that we want. So this is a very short presentation about advocacy and design in terms of in-law units. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to.
Thank you, June.
That was really fast.
that was amazing. So visual, and I understand the power of ADU development on personal family wealth. So thank you so much for highlighting that. One of the things, and I ask you audience, come up with questions for June. We have her for the next 4.5 minutes. Can you speak a little bit more to the nonprofit industrial institution as it relates to ADU development?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that we're seeing is everyone loves the idea of prefab, right? But we also have to look at who owns that prefab factory. There are no prefab factories owned by a minority. They're all owned by white men. Now, if we're gonna spend and authorize $516 million of affordable housing, right? And that typically goes to a nonprofit affordable housing developer. Please look at who runs these organizations. Please also look at who gets those contracts to build, who looks at those contracts to design. It is disgusting, the fact that you are not seeing minority design firms design affordable homes. It is not minority firms that are getting those contracts. It is not minority firms that are building those homes. And so the cycle of funding, which also applies to private development, is exactly what's happening in the nonprofit sector. And then we're spending, you the taxpayer, because these are debts, $600,000 being spent on a single apartment to construct it, versus 150, which could have been a simple loan to a family to stabilize that family. But also look at the fact that affordable housing units are not condos, they're apartments. So you're paying rent. You are not developing wealth. So we have to track the dollars to really understand the nuance that exists in the affordable housing market that we are taking for granted as a good cause. But really, when you look at the dollars and how they're being spent, I really question it. And I'm seeing it on, we can look outside and see how many people are on the streets.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. A lot of questions coming in. So we'll keep this one moving. Who is funding ADUs in the Bay? And is it affordable for the smaller developers who are looking to do that work? How do you do it for smaller Black-run firms?
We actually need a lot more Black and brown folks to pipe up and be adamant that they want to build. What is happening is that we are too quiet, and I'm the only one in the space sometimes. You don't get a product around financing if the banks don't understand that there's a market. So you have to actually clamor that you want to build. They're not going to design something if they don't believe that there's a market for it. So you're going out there and letting your people who you've elected to let them know you want an in-law unit package. Your bank, if you're working with a credit union, self-help credit union, has a loan program. I know Community Bank of the Bay is currently working with us to create a home loan program. Silicon Valley Housing Trust has created a great program, which we're all trying to replicate in various cities. So each city right now is trying to create an ADU permit process as well as loan process. But a large part of it has to do with the fact that homeowners need to clamor and really say, we want a home loan. We do not want to subsidize housing.
Excellent. Well, there's so many questions. We'll take all of these questions and we will ask June to respond to them for the follow-up email. But let's take one more. So how do we generate buy-in? This is from Ingrid Rivera, and the previous question was from Naima McQueen. How do we generate buy-in, in particular when we are thinking about the housing crisis and so many folks falling into homelessness, especially now in light of COVID? How do we get homeowners to allow folks experiencing homelessness to open their homes? And how do we ensure services are provided so that folks can eventually move into their own homes?
So the question assumes that homeowners are not interested or willing. In fact, homeowners are, and I'm actually working with a group of us, maybe 10 of us, we're predominantly African-American. We're funded through CZI, Chan Zuckerberg. where I think next summer we'll be able to launch the program that starts to address this issue around not just education, but how to onboard and encourage homeowners to take on in-law units. Because I recognize that what we're doing is asking homeowners to become developers. And as designers, we are able to create that baseline that will be like a guideline and educational process about how to build your own in-law unit, who to talk to, which bank to go to, et cetera. But I have yet to meet a homeowner who is not interested in building. In fact, I have not met a single African-American homeowner who is not interested in building an in-law unit. So there's a narrative out there that people are afraid. And actually, that's not the narrative I experience.
Excellent. Well, we'll take one last one because there's so many, and clearly people are a very juicy topic. Provost Chinyere asked, how could creative land use of land owned by higher ed institutions also be a part of sparking this kind of transformative development?
Oh, that's a fantastic question, because many institutions have dormitories as well as their own empty land. I would say that we need to create a master plan around that if we really want to do large numbers of small units, because at that point you're really going into development. But also if you have a network of homeowners who have typically rented to students, you may want to tap those homeowners to see if they're interested in building an in-law unit. Because right now we know, say the teachers union is interested in supporting in-law units. And we have a list of teachers who are looking to rent in-law units. And what we're trying to do is create a financial package just for the teaching association. So I think if an institution steps up and say, we want to build, we can do that. We can work with the institution to figure out what that process would be. You got to reach out to me so I help you out.
My name is Reem Assil. I'm a chef here in the Bay Area. We have a bakery and restaurant in both Oakland and Mission. And really our mission is to build community through the warmth of Arab bread and hospitality. I'm here on California Ohlone land cultivated by generations of indigenous Ohlone people who experienced a genocide, expulsion, and cultural erasure of their people, but are still steadfast in their struggle for determination. I acknowledge the land that I'm on is stolen land in order to know my place in that history. In Arabic, we call this resilience samud, steadfast resilience. And as the daughter of immigrants forced from their homelands, I too understand how land, language, food, and culture are all interconnected and important for our survival as a people. My work in food sovereignty locally is inherently linked to my Arab identity. So I want to invite you to all go on a journey with me into the future. Close your eyes if you'd like, drop into your breath, and now fling yourself forward through time. It's now 2051. You're standing on your favorite street corner. What does the land around you look like? Is there greenery? Who's tending to it? Are there buildings? What kind of buildings? As you stand on the street corner, how do you feel? Feel yourself traveling back to the current moment and think to yourself, how was the future different? Did it get better or worse? And what role did you play in it all? We all have a role to play in determining the fate of our future. For me, it's using food as a tool for transformation with everyone who intersects with my work. From our very inception, our vision was clear at Reem's to build a strong, unapologetically Arab institution that invests in the diverse community that surrounds it in order to build our resilience. Foundational to that vision is respect for workers, vendors, farmers, and customers, and ultimately every link in the food system. To get there, we provide good jobs, nourishing food and sanctuary space, prioritizing BIPOC communities who've been pushed to the margin, separating them from the very things that make them resilient. So to frame our discussion around food justice, I'm going to present you the state of the dough, pun intended. It's important to look closely at wealth and ownership to see how our food systems are shaped and who has the power to shape them. To understand food security, we must understand wealth. According to census data, whites make up over 96% of land ownership, while farmers of color comprise less than 4.5% collectively. They're more likely to be tenants than owners and generate less wealth from their farming. This is especially stark for Black communities who make up less than 2%. This is a long departure from 40 acres and a mule, land promised to newly freed slaves in order to gain financial mobility. Black Americans are losing up to 30,000 acres a year, leaving them little to no wealth to pass down to generations below them. And so while white farmers dominate as operator owners, farm workers and food workers from field to fork are overwhelmingly people of color. Most are paid poverty wages and disproportionately food insecure. Wage theft is also rooted in slavery, when newly emancipated slaves were forced to work for tips and the introduction of the subminimum wage. So those who have tried to gain financial freedom through food business ownership are at a huge disadvantage. According to La Cocina, the food incubator program that I was part of, despite the growth of their business, women of color are still denied bank loans, still more frequently less capital funding. So what is food sovereignty? The term was coined in 1996 by members of Via Campesina, an international farmers organization. And it's two things: the right of all people to design and influence their own food systems, and the right to healthy, culturally appropriate and sustainable food. So it's a little different than food justice. Food justice is really, I desire access to nutritious food for a healthy life. And food sovereignty is really about, I have a right to access and produce food, and the self-determination of my community is dependent on this right. And Reem sits at the intersection of all of that, just like many other restaurants. We're embedded in communities. We're not just places to get food, but also vital community spaces that provide connection and safety. We're economic engines as employers, and we play an important role in keeping dollars in neighborhoods. We've ultimately been the ones that have fed the most food insecure in this pandemic. And as you can see, we're at the risk of losing them. As of today, 17% of restaurants, that's more than 110,000 establishments in the US, have closed. Most of them have been fixtures in their communities, being open for at least 16 years. And over 11 million restaurant workers are basically predicted to be out of a job by the end of this year if we don't do something right now. So as you can see, they're predicting a K-shaped recovery where we're at the point of extinction and desperation, and big companies are reaping the benefits. So at Reams, we talk about fighting for a just recovery. This is the moment we have to intervene. We consider this as an opportunity to plant and grow the seeds that have already been planted, tapping into the richness of indigenous foodways that nourish this fight against colonialism. A just recovery. For us at Reams, it means transitioning to worker ownership as a step to rebuilding the restaurant industry by centering our workers, feeding our most food insecure by leveraging resources from our community to remains an essential piece of our work. We hope that reimagining our business model will build resilience so that we can survive the shocks of disaster capitalism to come. We all have a role to play to fight for food justice and food sovereignty. So I ask you to reflect. What does it mean when you are full? Are you full at someone else's expense? What resources does it take for you to be full? What will it take for us all to be full? Thank you.
Thank you, Reem. Such a powerful presentation. And I love the discussion about food sovereignty versus justice. I am asking of the audience, what are some questions that we have for Reem while we have her for the next 4 minutes? And to kick it off, Reem, I would love for you to talk about what are some of the things that we as community members, right, can do to help actualize this future that you painted. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah. Well, you know, as I kind of alluded to in my presentation, one of the biggest things for us is really thinking about the intersection of food and land, food and ownership. If we are to sort of rebuild this economy into one where all are food secure, we must center the people that are the most impacted by this, the most hurt by these systems. And so as consumers, I can sort of use as an example. So all of us have sort of different roles to play in that. I always tell consumers, like really think about where you put your dollars, right? Are you investing in things that are more extractive in our economy or are more regenerative, right? Because what we're seeing sort of in the food world is that we are moving to more localized ecosystems, right? So that we can build that resilience, because we know inevitably more shocks in disaster capitalism are coming our way. So as community members thinking about, particularly sort of the food spaces that are central to their lives, what are they investing in sort of, and what are they not investing in?
Excellent. We have two questions that came in. What does food sovereignty look like in urban areas versus rural areas? And that was by Amy Danino. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are so siloed. Like the food system is so interconnected, right? Like when COVID hit, we saw that, the whole thing was impacted by that. And so, I can only speak to sort of my place as, a small business owner, a woman of color, trying to build an institution here in the context of these sort of capitalist forces that are not always aligned with my values of wanting to fight for food justice or food sovereignty in my community. But that there's a role that I could play sort of in, like I saw sort of firsthand farmers and their supply chains and not being able to provide, because restaurants were a huge life source for them. And so food ownership, land ownership, land trusts, all of those things, I think, are going to be a big part of like how we look at farming in the rural areas and how that connects to the urban areas. And as a restaurant, I feel like I'm sort of a connector, right, in between sort of the urban and rural, and sort of what role as a restaurant that I play.
Excellent. And another question, a food industry person, this is from Nurhalisa Mohammed. A food industry person told me the controversy presented when BIPOC businesses acquire brick and mortars and then start to raise their prices. What can we say about this? How are underpaid food people included in this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I can speak to that as someone who has grappled with sort of how do I set my prices so that I'm allowed to pay my workers a living wage, but not price my community out, and Reem's has really had to grapple with that, because the true cost of food, if you want to really value the labor of the farmers who've cultivated those ingredients, and to pay your workers a living wage, you have to kind of figure that out. And so what we've done is sort of try to figure out a way for people with more disposable income to subsidize us to be able to do sort of feed our community. And our feeding efforts right now in the time of COVID have really proved that to be an amazing model. And so I want to think more of sort of mutual aid efforts. Like, I don't think it's impossible to have a business and not price out your community. And we're trying to figure that out. But it is a nuanced question for us, because we're transitioning into worker ownership. Our workers are still central in that conversation.
Excellent. And we'll take one last question from Sarah Arndt. Do you see any opportunities or connections between the restaurant industry and public food assistance programs like SNAP or school lunch? What could these programs learn from restaurants? Are there opportunities to work together?
Absolutely. That is a great question. I mean, if you think about it, restaurants right now have the infrastructure to feed so many people, right? And with the sort of new laws, we have the facilities, we have the skills, we have the workers. And so on a federal level, we're fighting for, actually, there's like the FEED Act, which is coming down the line. And we hope that that would allow FEMA money to go to recovery effort. We know that like disaster is not disaster, but the recovery effort is going to be a long term. And so we hope to get some of that federal funding to really subsidize that work, because I think we have the infrastructures to do it and we have the will to do it. And everybody wins from that. And so I hope to see more sort of public-private partnerships that way, because restaurants have such an important role in food insecurity. And I think the time is now to kind of really look at those models.
So I want to talk a little bit today about reimagining justice. And I think it's important for us to understand that we build what we believe, right? If we believe that there are people who are less than us, less important, Black and brown folks, June talked about elders, we build that, right? And it exacerbates and foments those beliefs, and they outlast us, right? Exacerbating that. And I cannot imagine a piece of infrastructure where we see that more than in our criminal justice architecture, right? When I look at this, I see that we've built punishment, we've built separation, power, hierarchy, and these are filled with a disproportionate amount of Black and brown bodies. And we are building this rather than investing in community. So when my firm starts to think about what we do, we're like, well, what do we build instead of this, right? That prettier versions are not the solution. We are solutionaries together, and these are new spaces and new places that we may not have even imagined, right? That have to get built, a whole constellation of infrastructure to address the root causes rather than the thing itself. And so the process for that for us is super critical, right? This radical reimagining with community, we have to ignite that, right? We have to move people into a mindset of elastic thinking, right? To come up with new solutions. We have to co-learn, right? People need to understand the built environment, and we need to take their wisdom and develop these new solutions and prototypes. And so this engagement of tools and games and creative practice together is built into a process that we use where design is being looked at, the finance, right? How do we pay for this? We have program providers working with us, sometimes policy, and together we're able to come up with a really robust concept for a prototype that we can then go use to leverage big dollars. And so over this time, we really identified 3 buckets of work, right, that we need to build to end mass incarceration. And these are restorative reinvestments in communities. These are restorative reentry infrastructure, right, for folks coming home. And this is the repurposing and reimagining of criminal justice infrastructure. Now, most of our stuff are restorative reinvestments, right? We're disinvesting from criminal justice and reinvesting in communities most impacted. And our pop-up village project is like a pop-up to permanent solution, right? Like, how do we take a constellation of resources, activate blighted sites, and bring beautiful, beautiful, although temporary infrastructure, such as shops and barbers, and we have classrooms, and we have fresh food and produce, and the library comes. But we also have like vehicles, right, where people can get massage and acupuncture. And this particular vehicle supports women released from jail in the middle of the night when it's not at our village, survivors of sex trafficking, and right now is out on Treasure Island supporting unhoused women, right? So these sort of mobile places that allow people to get ready access to resources. And we have to build bricks and mortar, right? So Restore Oakland is an example of the country's first restorative justice and restorative economic center in the Fruitvale, opened last year. We helped nonprofits buy this building, we gutted it, and we turned it into a restaurant that trains low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs in fine dining. Has the largest fine dining training kitchen in the country. La Cocina, where Reem studied and worked and launched, is there. Also, Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Causa Justa Just Cause, activists on the top floor, and the county's first dedicated space for restorative justice, right? Rather than sending people to court. This project has ignited another project, right? We're already seeing this amplification, right? I believe in a different type of justice, let's make more. And so we're now going to own DJDS Real Estate Holdings. And in Detroit, we will be creating an entire campus, right? A social justice campus we call the Love Campus. And it starts with that building in this picture right behind myself and our team called the Love Building. And the Love Building is very similar to Restore Oakland. It's owned by a whole range of nonprofits who will occupy, activate this incredible site with beautiful outdoor community space. We'll have wonderful food on the ground floor, Detroit Justice Center, Detroit Disability Power, right? A whole group of social justice groups. And they started construction on this last month, right? So it's a big deal, right? This is happening. And at the same time, my organization will be purchasing the blue lots that you see here to expand that into a campus, right? We'll have workforce development hub. We will be investing in food sovereignty through a food ecosystem, as Reem was talking about, daily needs retail, arts and culture, education and literacy space, youth spaces, and spaces for folks returning home, both in terms of records expungement or just being together, to housing. We know this reentry piece is challenging due to NIMBYism, due to the fact that financing structures are challenged, and we have thousands of folks coming home from prison and jail because of COVID, right? Ending up homeless and in shelters and having nowhere to go. So one project we were working on is our mobile refuge rooms. They are really pop-up rooms that provide dignity and privacy to folks. We've designed them with formerly incarcerated men and women. We built them with formerly incarcerated men and women at Laney College. The beta is in the field. We are building a business model. We have our patents in, and we're hoping to have many more of these coming out next year. And so the last bucket of work, right, is one that is increasingly being seen across the country. We just finished a process with Atlanta to repurpose the Atlanta City Detention Center into a center for equity, right? This is a 475,000 square foot building that used to have over 1,000 people, now it's 20. And these buildings are harmful, right? They've harmed people. And we're seeing this everywhere. In Oakland too, right? Our jail is empty. And it's important we engage community in reimagining this. We engage hundreds and hundreds of Atlantans using model making, our space and finance planning, to be like, what's a center for equity, right? And they're like, it's a one-stop shop that has all the things we need, right? Behavioral health services, food, and really community space, right? That was the thing people wanted the most. And when we showed the 4 options to them, they didn't even want to repurpose it, right? They're like, tear it down. We want to see a Center for Equity campus. Or even better, we want to distribute the Centers for Equity in our own community, right? And just leave that site, right? So this is the sort of vision for our jails as we begin to reimagine what they could be. And now what we've been able to do is take all of these projects, right? Over 10 years of research, and create a kind of visualization and mapping tool, right? That allows communities and gives them the agency to plan their neighborhoods with the infrastructure they need to end mass incarceration and the police state as we know it. So I'm inviting you to go back to rethinking if justice is about transformation, right? If we believe that, right? It's about caring, right? It's about loving one another. What does that look like, right? Join us in kind of reimagining what we need to build instead of what we've been seeing. And justice is what love could look like, right? In public. But thank you.
Deanna, powerful as usual. It seems like you're solving all of the world's problems with your work. Truly, it's so, I mean, at least the US's problems. And as the audience thinks of questions for you, I will again continue the question surrounding what can we do to support your vision?
Yeah, people always ask that. And you know, I say the same thing, so I'm maybe getting boring. I always ask people to do their work on themselves. I ask people to do the inner work around their internalized racism, their internalized patriarchy. This is work we all have to do. And it really starts with us, right? It really starts with making sure that what do I truly believe? Because if it goes unexamined and it goes unanalyzed, you'll just act it out. You'll act it out just subconsciously, right? And be contributing to the very thing we say we don't want. And so that's an inquiry I do with myself all the time. What am I really thinking and believing? Mm-hmm. What's the world I want to see? And I encourage folks to believe in abolition, that it's possible, and have a vision for the world you want to see, and know that we're living in someone else's imagination, right? This is not my imagination. And begin to imagine with us.
Excellent. We did get some questions in. So I will start with, let's see here. Wondering from Amelia All, wondering if you can speak to the connection between police and prison abolition through your work. Are there ways you are designing spaces that aim to provide community care and safety and abolish the police?
Yeah, you know, we're very interested in developing what we call de-escalation centers. We are tracking several groups, one in particular in Southern California that is already doing it at the Chuco Justice Center. I encourage you all looking at that, where they are training people to de-escalate. They do not call the police, right? So this is a no-call police site. You come here, you learn to disarm somebody, right, without a gun. You learn to use your words first. They're also doing transformative justice, right? Bringing Black and Brown gang members into the same space to have dialogue. So reducing violence before it ever happens. So this is to me, very, very exciting. And these are the kinds of spaces and program in place together that we need to be supporting. I would love to do one in Detroit at the Love Campus.
Excellent. Someone also asked, how has the pandemic affected the progress of your sites and efforts?
Yeah, I think it's affected us, right? We don't decouple the pandemic in many ways from the racial uprising we saw, because that has meant that our work had to get amplified, right? So we've doubled our organization during the pandemic. We've had to have more people to address the bigger need and the awakening and the way that it's, supporting people to move projects forward. At the same time, very hard to do design work in this format, right? We're trying to use all these new digital tools. The communities we're working with don't have access to the kind of technology that we need. We've had to identify ourselves as essential workers and get on planes safely as we can and be on the ground, right? We did road trips. We've trained people locally on the ground who can do things. So we're really trying any means necessary, because the work is continuing and growing.
And thank you. There have been a number of folks talking about the different locations, Detroit, Oakland, and now Atlanta. And so can you talk more about why those places, how they're connected?
Yeah, so we've been working nationally from the beginning. Part of our strategy has been we just need to build the new models, right? I don't care where you are. I don't care if you're in the middle of Kansas, my little butt's gonna get out there and figure out how we're gonna make it work. Our first project was in Syracuse, New York. I would hustle up there. So it's almost about who are the right partners, right? Strong partners, people doing some really cutting edge shit, right? And you work with them and you show up there. So Atlanta, I've seen stuff I'd never seen before. LA County is doing some crazy stuff, you guys, like alternative to incarceration infrastructure. Detroit wanted to be the country's first restorative justice city. I was on a plane in about half a second to go help them out. So we just go where the genius is.
Love it.
And it's in Oakland too, so we're focusing here too.
Absolutely. And so 2 more questions. I think they're small enough that we might be able to cover them. How are you leveraging ADUs and home ownership with the reentry population? Is it from by Alfredo Mathew?
Yeah, so Impact Justice is doing some great work around supporting reentry folks coming in to live with folks in their homes. I'm on June's list as a support for that particular piece. So whenever June calls me and wants my help with that, we're on it. So I know that June's thinking about that, and we will support her in making sure that also happens, and I think it'll be tied well, like if we start to pair it with Impact Justice's program, right? So we take the place piece, Impact Justice, it's imminent and it's so obvious.
Excellent. And then the last question, what is Oakland's response about redesigning the downtown jail?
Ooh, tell you what, that is yet to come. I don't think they have a plan, but I have one. So we'll see if we get a chance to implement that. We're raring to go. We would love to help them reimagine and repurpose that facility.
We would love to see that work be done.
So I'm here to reimagine entrepreneurship. We know that business ownership is essential to the well-being of our society. And what we've learned in 2020 is just how fragile all of our systems are, our democracy, small businesses, et cetera. And right now here in California, we just went into another stay-at-home order. And how many small businesses are going to survive this new stay-at-home order? We're looking at potentially losing 25% of the small businesses, maybe 45% of the Black and brown small businesses in America. And what this means is we're losing the largest employers. Now, in order to get into this and explain how I got here, I want to take it back to my grandparents. This is Alfredo Mathew, Lydia Rose Mathew, immigrants from Puerto Rico who came to Spanish Harlem and raised 8 kids during the Great Depression. That was another time when we had to reimagine the future. And they came into it with, hopes and aspirations like all immigrants. That's me as a young kid in New York City, the 4th child of my dad. And when I think about what I grew up with a lot of potential and aspiration, but also a lot of fear about how I would make it. Here's a picture of me with my cousins during one of our trips to White Castle in the Bronx. My family was very much split between the Bronx and Westchester, and I always straddled those two worlds. My family was always trying to make it north out of the Bronx to Westchester, and I was trying to make it back to the South Bronx. This is my dad, Alfredo Mathew Jr., here with the late David Dinkins. They were friends, they were colleagues. My dad was the first Puerto Rican superintendent in New York City. He gave me so much, but what he really gave me was this tremendous legacy and this burden that I felt that I had to uphold. And another thing that my family gave me was this lesson, this value. And my Tio Rolando said that you're not important because someone tells you you're important. You're important because you're a child of God. You don't need other people to establish your worth. You are already worthy. So what did I do? You know, as a young man, I went into teaching. I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to be an educator. Went to the South Bronx. The South Bronx had a small school movement, just like Oakland had a small school movement. You know, I thought that we were changing lives. It was all about getting young people into college. And so for the next 14 years, I was a teacher. I came to California. I taught at LPS Oakland. Again, all about college access, getting young people into college. And I taught about 1,000 kids, and I realized over this time that only 15 to 25% of my young people were actually getting that college degree. We know that only 30% of Americans have a bachelor's degree, and that college for all was not for everyone. So I started to focus on career readiness and entrepreneurship. This is a picture of Bobby Reyes speaking at Dreamforce. I had the privilege to work for an organization that was working on entrepreneurial pathways, connecting young people to PayPal, Salesforce, all of these incredible companies. But again, I realized that those pathways were not necessarily real, and that all the work that we were doing connecting them to Silicon Valley wasn't necessarily going to connect them to jobs. And part of this was the recognition that more work needed to be done if we're going to address the roots of inequality. And we need real pathways to entrepreneurship. You need access to capital, ongoing training, and that is not going to be done just from the education side alone. So my new work that I started to get engaged with was to really think through not just workforce pathways, but entrepreneurial pathways. And I was given an opportunity by Councilmember Taylor to do some work with the MacArthur Corridor here in D6 in East Oakland. And, you know, he basically identified this corridor as an area that was ready to be activated. And through this work, you know, I basically connected with the incredible entrepreneurial talent that exists in D6 and D7. And we incubated an incubator called ESO Ventures. And over the last 6 months, we've been working with early stage entrepreneurs, helping them get to launch and to profitability. And it wouldn't have been possible without an incredible team. On the left here, you have Ben Wanzo and Martha Hernandez, two very successful D6 Oakland entrepreneurs who have really helped to guide and frame this. And on the right, you know, my colleagues, the team that really helped to make this come alive. But it's about people owning the vision. And the vision is really, how do we help people like Patricia Ellis and Jerry Bailey develop $1 million businesses here in D6? Patricia with Weekend Mobile Notary, Jerry with a Yaba Wines and Africa-inspired sangria. They have incredible potential if we can remove some of the barriers. We know that right now, so many workers have been displaced. We know right now, so many businesses are going under. So how do we put people back to work, and how do we make business ownership a way that people can get back into the workforce, and not as employees, but as business owners? This is a $6.8 trillion opportunity if we can help people find a pathway to profitability through business ownership, Black and brown entrepreneurs to business ownership. And there's a double bottom line just in terms of the criminal justice and all the other ways that we're investing in holding people back. So really, this is about owning your city. One of our entrepreneurs said, why do I want to be an entrepreneur? Because I want to own my city. I don't want to be displaced. I want to own the land. I want a business. I want assets. So how can we combine training and capital to make it happen? And it's basically going back to my Tio Rolando. You are worthy of investment. You are worthy of love. There's so many early stage entrepreneurs that we need to invest in. That's a picture of my son, and that's the message that I want for him. You are worthy.
Alfredo.
Yeah.
It was heartfelt. Love the personal stories and the images. Great to learn more about you. So I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everyone surrounding what can we do as community members? I live in D6. What can we do to support and actualize your vision?
Well, right. Well, first of all, it's our vision, right? Because
Yeah.
I started talking to you. I'm here because it's all about engaging everyone in conversation. That's what we've been hearing again and again from all these speakers. We have to co-create these things. So it begins with strong networks. There is an incredibly strong network in D6 and East Oakland. There's so many organizations doing great work, so many entrepreneurs, but we have to get aligned and we have to work together. Strong networks is incredibly important, and we have to leverage the assets that already exist. That we have Merritt College at the table, and that Merritt College wants to come down the hill and they want to activate the MacArthur corridor. That's a big deal, right?
Excellent. So we as community members, we need to just network with all of your small business owners, and we need to network with one another.
But network with a purpose, right? Because the big gap is the access to capital for the early stage entrepreneurs. So we have all the training providers we need, but we have to combine training with capital, because training without that funding source at the end, and the capital has to be new financial instruments. It cannot be the same old CDFIs, can't be the retail banks. There is no retail bank in D6. And if you don't have good credit, 54% of Americans don't have good credit, but they want to be an entrepreneur. How do we help those under the radar businesses, those side hustles, formalize, get the credit they need so that they can employ others and build where they are?
Excellent. So we're getting them some questions. How are small businesses and entrepreneurs shifting their products and services in response to COVID-19?
I mean, if you are not adapting and shifting, if you are not hustling during this time, I mean, you're not going to survive. Many of the entrepreneurs in our cohort, some of them are right here on the call, right? They were catering businesses. Now, all of a sudden, they're developing subscription services, delivery services, you know, really having to think about how to get to customers in new ways. You helped to develop a digital marketing certificate. That digital marketing certificate, we're now going to be able to offer for free through Merritt College to the ESO cohort, because every single business owner needs a digital presence. They need to understand digital marketing. That's a huge piece of this, digital transformation.
Yeah. Yes, and it's excellent. It actually feeds into this question by Ingrid Rivera Guzman surrounding how do we support new business owners and BIPOC small business owners with digital literacy skills and bridging the digital divide. So,
I mean, education is a part of it. One-to-one consulting is a part of it. I think the thing that we did best was building a community, right? A safe space for entrepreneurs to come together, learn together. That peer network is huge, right? That I see so many of our entrepreneurs right here now. This is the network that we're building, and we're just going to keep growing it because we are the best resource for one another.
All right, so I'm dedicating this presentation to the essential workers who are risking their lives every day to make sure that our system keeps on running, so thank you. That number you see, 150 million people, those are the number of working people in the US. And these faces represent the hours of work over the American employee's lifetime. That's 90,000 hours of work that we're investing. And this research is powered by the data that we collect at Great Place to Work. We're the world's largest workplace study. We've been studying corporations for over 30 years, and we really know what makes them tick. Our whole mission is about creating great workplaces for all. And our experience is inspired by MLK in that We've seen glimpses of the mountaintop, and there's tremendous hope and work to create a future for all that maximizes human potential. But what we know is that it's really tough out there. If you think about the US, only 49% of employees experience their workplace as a great one. And when we talk about great workplaces, we're talking about fundamentally trust, that they have credible, respectful, fair leadership, that we can take pride in your work and have people that you work with that you enjoy being there with. And the US has a pretty damn complicated history with workers and corporations. And it's key to recognize the system that enslavement upheld. For hundreds of years, some very recognizable corporations played a significant role in ensuring, financing, and legitimizing the cotton industry, for one, and by recognizing enslaved Africans as assets. This was business as usual. Our current system, we sort people into categories, and by virtue, we create winners and losers. That's replicated through all of our systems, specifically our financial system and how we get access to capital, our healthcare systems, which you heard about today, our education systems as well, which we've also heard. We get outcomes like gaps in racial wealth. So where do we go from here? What you see here is a picture of the housekeepers at Hilton, who pre-pandemic ranked #1 on our 100 best companies to work for list with Fortune magazine. Now, these people, 96% of these folks think that Hilton is a great place to work. And while they're not perfect, the experience of these frontline workers is one of empowerment, trust, and genuine caring. It's what you expect when you show up at a Hilton. But these new titans of business are using a sophisticated mix of artificial intelligence and frontline workers to serve consumers. And most of these frontline workers that, although it's modern, they are not on par with providing a living wage, and they're not really receiving the education and the financially sustainable future that we all need. This specter of artificial intelligence really looms large. And if you were old enough to know the Terminator movies, you know, it was the future supposed to be man versus machine, and a corporation was responsible for creating this robotic killing machine. As we're shifting from a knowledge economy to a human economy, creativity, passion, character, you can't program that into a software. Our current system relies on a powerful part of our human nature, which is fear. And we found that at a very basic level, fear drives people apart. Those categorizations reorganize and reinforce that fear, and we know that it's not working. And it actually doesn't work for our bottom lines of businesses. So our inclusive, anti-racist mental model must start here. We have to combat fear by providing what people really want. To create this intersectional, anti-racist world, we have to focus on creating a sense of safety, a sense that people can be physically safe when carrying out their work duties on behalf of the company, that they have to be emotionally safe enough to be vulnerable and open, and that there's a psychologically safe enough to take risks. This is my big bet over the next 25 years. When you do this, this is what really truly powers innovation. It's not the lone genius in the basement or in the garage. Central to that is this sense of innovation by all, that everyone is central to that acceleration, especially frontline employees. How are people and companies ensuring that they're capitalizing on those ideas? And if we don't, what's the cost of neglecting this human potential? For us to really create this world, we have to be more transparent. And most companies today are not transparent about the stuff that really matters. For example, earlier this year, PwC released their first D&I report, kind of their own internal impact. Do you know how many people cautioned their chairman, Tim Ryan, to not release it? It was like people close to him on the executive board. But they know that they have to do that in order to survive the next 100 years. And the market is beginning to see the advantages of businesses who do good working with businesses who do good. And more investor cash is beginning to flow to businesses that support and amplify great practices. During this pandemic, a grocery store called Wegmans started hiring people from other certified best companies because they know that these companies and these people are really valued. We have to partner with folks. This intersectionality that you see here, it really takes into account the full identity of the employees. And the people who do not do this or cannot do this in the future, they will be punished. It doesn't simply pit black against white. It really involves and invites all of our identities and spectrums into the workplace. When people show up more fully, people experience the world differently. But what we have to do as leaders is we need to focus on the people who are most impacted. This is where we make systemic change. To create this world that we're all imagining, we have to view our policies and our systems like sharing profits and promotions and advancing leaders through the lens of the impact that it's going to have. Not just the financial benefits of our decision, but the human part of our decisions. Some of our research, we found that the most often marginalized employees are the bellwethers of our economy and the business climate. You can see women, people of color, hourly male workers, long tenured employees, frontline workers. They often feel the effects first of businesses running into trouble, whether that's wage cuts or the threat of layoffs. And companies who do that, who ignore this, will do so at their own peril. Quite simply, why this is better for business. Our research shows that statistically, companies who treat their people right outperform financial measures like the Russell 1000 by 3x. Turnover is 50% less, especially for those hard to, those impacted workers, and innovation thrives. We have to continue to find equality in equity in the work that we're doing. It's better for people. People bring their best selves to work. They enjoy healthier, much more fulfilling lives. They enjoy coming to work. They believe that the policies are fair, and they believe that they're really making a difference. Those real human values of care, compassion, and respect are how we get things done when we create great workplaces for everyone. And at the end of the day, it's better for the world. The workplaces that are really trying to lead this charge are strengthening the social fabric. The people believe in and experience a greater sense of belonging, caring, solidarity inside and outside of the company with the communities in which they live and serve. This work is meaningful, it's high trust, and it elevates the human spirit. Leaders have to do the stepping up because, number one, it's a big mission, and we believe that this work is not all for us. We may not see it all the way through, but I trust that we're getting to a place where more and more people will experience corporations doing good by being good and partnering with others that are doing a very similar thing. This is the world that we want to see. We believe that it's for all, and if we don't do it, basically the people in our world depend on us to do the right thing and create these great workplaces for everyone. That's it.
Thank you, Julian Lute. So powerful presentation and very relevant for so many of us who, have worked in larger companies before. And so I'm going to ask you the same question I did of the speakers surrounding, thinking about community empowerment. What are some of the things that we can, as individuals, community members, frontline workers, do to help actualize, this vision?
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say two things. One is, if you're a leader of people in any way, you have to really look at your people as assets, not in the financial assets, but that they are coming into this to your enterprise, your small business, your medium-sized business, your team with hopes, dreams, and history. And so being able to make sure that you're looking at people as humans and realizing that they have potential to be maximized, not just for the benefit of the organization, but for the benefit of themselves, their families, and their communities, is the first place. So it starts with leadership. I've been in so many organizations where I'm fighting leaders to not look at their employees as resources or line items in their budget as human resources, but to really see them as people. And once you get through that, you can start, kind of building this world. And I'd say, as individual people, frontline leaders, I think you have to, or frontline employees, you have to, in your own way, stand up and demand what you expect out of a workplace, what you expect out of your corporation, how you expect and communicate how you expect your company to engage with the community around it, and maybe even the community that you live in as well. Those are the two things top of mind.
Excellent. Thank you. Another question from Syra Pasha. How do we change rigid mindsets who have power at the top and completely unaware of being human 101? Where do we start as leaders?
Well, what's funny is we were talking about this on a team call yesterday. When we look at some of our strategic partners, some of the Fortune 100 companies that we've worked with, it all starts with a personal experience. You have to get into the communities that you're trying to affect. You have to be touched and moved. We heard people telling their stories. You have to, you can't just read it in a book and go out and do it. You have to find a way to connect with people. We were listening to the former chairman of AT&T on the stage a couple of years ago at Great Place to Work at our conference, our summit, and he was talking about his best friend and his wife's best friend. They African-American family, he's white identified and his wife was white identified. Well, for 25 years, they had never discussed race. And until, the shootings in Dallas, that was their flash moment for them to actually start having this conversation. And you know, I don't know how you don't do that. You know how we talk in our household, but it's interesting that it takes that personal something to connect you back to this mission and to actually the desire to do something different and see the world differently.
Excellent. Thank you, Julian. So we'll take one more question. We are going to run over a few minutes, folks. We have until about 2:10, so I do apologize. But let's see. Alfredo Matthews asks, how is remote work changing the workplace and how will it affect the relationships to place?
Yeah.
To reach global markets, but my fear, companies further lose their relationship to place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, I think as a core, so that is true in terms of how people are, you know, starting to wrap their heads around it. But people that actually work in the corporations are resilient, and they are actually reaching back into whatever communities that they are, that they live in, that they may have moved to, and they're actually like, I trust in the people because the people want to be a part of wherever they are. And so that's one thing that we've seen. People, no matter where I've been over the last 6 months virtually, everyone is looking for connection. That's the main thing that we're hearing. Even if you're Zoom fatigued out and you don't want to talk to anybody and you've been sitting in front of a computer screen for 12 hours, people still thrive on this connection. And so I trust that people still will find ways in their community to engage. More and more companies are finding ways to help people support communities. You know, like even at Great Place to Work, we had a couple months during the early part of the pandemic where every week, you know, we had a meal sponsored by our company. Everyone in the company could get a meal for their family from a local business. And we did that for about 8 weeks. So we were trying to do our part to stay connected to our community and also actually put some money in pockets where people where people were struggling. So I believe in the power of people. I think that they're going to do the right thing. And if we get more of those people in the right positions in leadership and organizations, there's no telling where we're going to head. And we're moving in the right direction. So I love that part.
My name is Sandra Kwak, and I'm the founder of 10 Power. We are a certified B Corporation working to bring renewable energy to people around the world who don't have access to electricity today. And we do that through project development and finance. So project development, providing engineering codes and standards, working to build capacity within the community with a gender empowerment lens, and finance, sourcing the appropriate capital to help businesses and individuals get access to renewable energy and to pay so that they're saving money on electricity. 10 Power was founded in 2015. And my background before that was big data for the smart grid. My life mission is to reverse climate change within my lifetime and get humanity back on course with evolution that's in sync with human evolution and natural evolution. We've been working in Haiti to provide commercial scale solar with a gender empowerment lens. And if you look at the places in the world that have the lowest access to electricity, you'll notice that they're clustered around the equator. It's kind of the curse of colonialism. But what's interesting about these places that have low access to electricity is that when you overlay renewable energy generation potential, the places with the highest energy poverty on the planet are actually the places that have the most potential for solar. It's the places that we have the most sunshine. We chose to start our business in Haiti because it's the closest place to the United States that has that deep red, high energy poverty. Over 70% of the population doesn't have access to electricity. And unfortunately, a lot of these communities who contributed the least to climate change are the ones who are suffering the impacts of climate change, which has been further compounded by the global pandemic. And I'll get into that a little bit later. I think this is actually a quadruple pandemic that we're facing, not just disease. It's also the pandemic of colonialism, climate change, and capitalism. Haiti is an incredible place to be. It's full of natural resources and beauty, full of incredible people who are working to achieve their highest potential. And it is 10 Power's goal to help every being achieve their highest capabilities that they want to impart upon the world. Now, a little bit about myself. I actually didn't find this out until recently. My dad is from South Korea, which was the poorest country on the planet when he was a little kid. And within one generation, I see the potential for a country to really go from the bottom of the stack to the top of the stack. Haiti was the first Black republic. Their revolt in 1804 enabled them to become independent and to overthrow slavery. And I really see a lot of potential for Haiti to continue that trajectory and for there to be a south to north technology transfer. Now, it's similar to what June was talking about in terms of the humanitarian industrial complex and the nonprofit industrial complex. we're still seeing a lot of vestiges of that in Haiti, which is also known as the Republic of NGOs. We see a lot of potential for Haitian businesses to be able to create their own resources through energy independence and get off of diesel generation from dirty, polluting diesel generators, which not only create climate change, but also have impacts on people's lung health, critically important during the times of COVID especially, and to help them get onto reliable, renewable electricity, which is creating benefits that are reinvested into their community. 10 Power's business model is threefold. We bring project development in terms of international engineering codes and standards. We source finance so that customers can pay back over time, saving money every single month. This is a crucial missing piece in a lot of these markets. And we're focused on building out local ecosystems with a gender empowerment lens. We've launched a women's solar installer training program, and we are helping to reinvest money back into these communities. We take a small markup on the project development, which is a markup on the equipment and installation. We work all with local installers. And then we also charge interest on the solar loans, and we reinvest those revenues back into future projects. We're proud to be working on multiple UN Sustainable Development Goals, or global goals, namely number 1, no poverty, number 5, gender empowerment, number 7, renewable energy access for all, and number 13, climate action now. Now I'll get a little bit into our projects. So one of our first projects was solar for Dlo Haiti. Dlo means water in Creole. We put solar on 2 of their water purification facilities, which in turn are providing free drinking water to school children and supporting over 600 micro enterprises, majority women-led. One of our flagship projects was solar on UNICEF Haiti's headquarters. When we installed this project in 2018, it was actually the largest solar plus renewable energy storage project on any UNICEF base in the entire world. And we're proud to be demonstrating that places like Haiti can lead in implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Here's a little bit of drone footage from our UNICEF Haiti solar install. The woman in the beginning was Daphne. She's our Haiti operations engineer. This project was implemented on 3 of their office buildings in downtown Port-au-Prince, where they base all of their Haiti operations out of. And we launched our women's solar installer training program with this project, which we're proud to be continuing. The women solar installers that we have been training are students at one of Haiti's leading tech universities called Haiti Tech University. And we've been providing field experience for them. Several of them have gotten jobs with our local Haitian solar installer partners. And it's just incredible to hear these women talk about how energy independence is so important to their livelihood, to their country's livelihood, and they're proud to be participating in this initiative. During the pandemic, we completed a project on the island of La Gonave, which is an island off the coast of Haiti, right here. And this solar-powered water desalination plant is now providing clean drinking water for over 40,000 people. Now, getting into the root causes of what's behind energy inequality has been compounded by the pandemic. I really see it as a fourfold attack on society. It's not just the COVID pandemic, it's also the vestiges of colonialism, which are very much live in our society right now, climate change, which is just getting worse and worse by the minute, and capitalism, which is exacerbating the rich-poor gap. In my TED Talk, Fourth World Nation Building, I explore my vision for a future which is more equitable and just, that includes things like 100% renewables for 100% of humanity, net zero buildings that generate oxygen and food, using informatics, big data, and AI to help us better understand our natural systems, and respecting traditional ecological knowledge that has come built up by generations before us. Thanks so much. Y'all can follow us on social media. Our handle is @10power. And so much gratitude to you, Carrie, to your class that's been working with us this semester on a marketing project, and to all the other amazing work that the presenters on this call are doing.
Thank you so much, Sandra. You know, I'm a huge fan of your work and what you're doing to one of the poorest countries in the world. So thank you so much. So I'm going to pose the same question to you. What are some of the things that we as individuals can do to help you actualize this work and see this vision through?
Well, climate change is really up to all of us. And no matter what industry that you're working in, food systems are incredibly important. Building materials, talking to the work that the people on this call are doing, building aggregates use an incredible amount of carbon dioxide, but also there are building aggregates that exist that can harvest carbon out of the atmosphere and put them into our building materials. Farming systems takes carbon and puts it back down into the ground. So no matter what you're doing, whether you're an artist, a scientist, a business person, you can incorporate climate into your activities, similar to the ways that we need to incorporate social justice. And a lot of those things can be done intersectionally at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a few questions coming in. Is this model being used locally as well? What are the different considerations for using it locally?
So we actually now at 10 Power are looking at expanding our business model locally now that we've been able to launch in one of the hardest places to do business in the world. And when I started 10 Power, I began it with a mission of helping people who don't have access to electricity. And now with the blackouts and wildfires, we're seeing that a lot of people here in California are without electricity during crucial moments. And so I'm super interested in partnering with folks who are working on electricity and energy access for underserved communities. And there are some really amazing business models and nonprofits that are working here in the Bay Area, such as Grid Alternatives, where people can volunteer their time to do solar installations on low-income homes. And we are especially interested in working with communities, low-income communities of color, to help create models that feed equity back into the community.
In closing, it's the giving season. Please donate to the CTA if you are so inspired and able. We aim to continue to bring you relevant programming, provide future speaker honorariums, undertake community-driven projects, and more. You can even direct employer matching gifts. You can also connect us with foundations, grants, and value-aligned speakers and organizations. The information for donating is in our reception page. It takes about 3 minutes to do. We will also be following up with an email and also trying to respond to some of the fabulous questions that you posed in the chat that we weren't able to cover. Thank you, everyone, and continue to remain optimistic and find joy as we charge on towards a better future. Thank you so much.